These are some frequently asked questions on the first part of the California legislative session. First, what generally happens in the first part of the California legislative session? During the first part, certainly of the first year of the 2 year session, legislators await their committee assignments, consider proposals for authoring bills, and for the new members, they have dozens and dozens of meet and greet appointments in which they meet their colleagues, constituents, and lobbyists. This usually occurs in January and a fair amount of February. By March, the budget subcommittees and policy committees begin hearing budget proposals, and the policy committees, of course, are considering policy bills. After the policy committees hear and vote on the bills, the vast majority of measures, between 75 and 80% of them, are then considered by the fiscal committee, which we call the appropriations committee in the California legislature, in both the Senate and the Assembly. Once a bill passes the first House Fiscal Committee, then the measures head to the respective floor for final consideration in their House of origin before going over to the second or other House to repeat the process. What's the usual legislative calendar in the first part of the session? Both the Assembly Chief Clerk and the Senate Secretary prepare a calendar for the session with corresponding authority found in joint rules. For example, it has the date the legislature convenes or reconvenes in the second year, the date that the budget must be submitted by the governor, which is generally January the 10th, is when it's constitutionally due, and which is usually when the governor presents the budget. Last day to submit bill requests to the Office of Legislative Counsel, last day for bills to be introduced, last day for policy committees to hear and report bills to the fiscal committee, last day for policy committees to hear and report bills to the floor for non-fiscal measures, the last day for policy committees to meet, the last day for fiscal committees to hear and report bills to the floor, the floor session only time period when no committees other than conference or rules committees are allowed to meet for any purpose, and then the last day for the bills to be passed out of their House of origin. What are the constitutional requirements in the first part of the session? The legislature must convene its regular session at noon on the first Monday in December of every even numbered year. And then, of course, they have to organize themselves, starting with election of officers, speaker first. The constitutional officers take office on the Monday after January 1st, following their election the prior November. The governor is required to report to the legislature each year on the condition of the state. This is called the State of the State Address. However, the governor doesn't have to do it in person, but can submit a report in writing. The governor may, but is not required to make recommendations to the legislature as a part of that annual report. Within the first day, 10 days of each year, the governor is required to submit to the legislature a budget for the forthcoming fiscal year that begins July 1. This is why the governor's first budget proposal is called the governor's Jan 10 budget, because it must be submitted by January the 10th. The budget is required to include an explanatory message as well as itemized statements for expenditures and estimated revenues. The governor may require a state agency or even a state employee to furnish whatever information he or she deems necessary to prepare the governor's budget. The budget bill is required to be introduced immediately in both houses by the respective budget committee chairs in the Senate and the Assembly. And the legislature must pass a budget by midnight on June the 15th. With each regular session convening, the president pro tempore of the Senate, the Speaker of the Assembly, and the two minority leaders or Republican leaders are required to report to their houses on the goals and objectives for the upcoming session. Another constitutional rule is that no bill other than the budget may be heard or acted upon by a committee in either house until it's been in print for 30 days after introduction, but this rule can be dispensed with by a 3/4 vote of the House. A bill cannot be passed unless it has been read by its title at least 3 days in each House, but this rule can be dispensed with by a 2/3 vote. What are the statutory requirements in the first part of the session? The budget submitted by the governor to the legislature within the first 10 days must contain a statement of accounts payable for the prior fiscal year and for the current fiscal year, as well as the succeeding fiscal year. And the budget submitted to the governor to the legislature within the first 10 days of each session must contain a statement of cash flow for the prior fiscal year and for the current fiscal year, as well as the succeeding fiscal year.